So if you remember from the introduction from this chapter, we subdivided metabolism into anabolism and catabolism. And then in catabolism,
just showing the rules.
You have large molecules, and then you use enzymes. And with these enzymes, these large molecules, you can break it down into small molecules. So that's catabolism. And what is the opposite? Anabolism. So basically bringing small molecules together, putting them, and making a large one. So in the case of nutrients, proteins can be catabolized into amino acids, or amino acids can be anabolized into proteins. And anabolism is also known as biosynthesis. So the four macromolecules that we have in our body will be nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. And they have structural functions in our cells, but also they have physiological function. And the process of then making these molecules is called biosynthesis or anabolism. So then with all of these, we also form these processes, we also form the carriers of electrons, which are FAD and NAD, which are in oxidized form, and when they receive these hydrogen ions, they are in reduced form, and they bring them into the electron transport chain so that they can generate ATP in the mitochondria, if you recall. So excess of nutrients coming from dietary intake will be stored. And then this storage, it can be used for later use to produce energy. So then the body needs a ready supply of nutrients to oxidize to maintain the metabolic functions, but the rest, it will store it. One of the storage forms that we have is glycogen. Glycogen is a storage of glucose. And we store this glycogen in the liver, in the muscle cells, whether they are cardiac muscle cells or if they are skeletal muscle cells. Now, skeletal muscle cells do not give their glycogen to the bloodstream, or do not give the glucose coming from the glycogen to the bloodstream. Why? Because the muscles are very active and they need to have their own supply of glycogen. However, after fast, when your glucose levels drops, the glycogen that we have in the liver is broken down to glycogenolysis so that we can give this into the bloodstream so that many tissues in our body, including the brain cells, the heart cells, etc., they can use this glucose to form energy. So then how do we form this? So we have enzymes that can couple bonds between different glucose molecules, and they will have this shape. So these are the bonds between these glucose molecules, and then this is a long polymer of glucose molecules. And you will have branching out of this, and you have an enzyme that forms this glycogen in the liver. The process of forming glycogen is known as glycogenesis. Now, the process of breaking down this glycogen when you need it is glycogenolysis. Glycogenolysis can be triggered by fasting, but also by the presence of enzymes, hormones like glucagon or epinephrine. Now, glucagon is the antagonistic hormone of insulin, while insulin is released by the beta cells in our pancreas when we have taken a meal to drop the blood glucose levels. Whenever we fast and our blood glucose levels drops, then this glucagon is released so that we can start breaking down glycogen, and our liver gives this glucose into the bloodstream so that we can elevate blood glucose levels. Now, another hormone that it helps to break down storage of glycogen, it is epinephrine. Epinephrine, it is released under circumstances like when you are in an emergency, and of course you need glucose to be alert. So in this case, this epinephrine also can lead to the breakdown of glycogen. Now, gluconeogenesis is actually the process, if you recall, of making glucose out of nutrients that are not glucose itself. Like, for instance, you can feed into the glycolytic cycle, you can feed amino acids, you can feed lipid molecules so that you can generate glucose when your glucose levels have dropped. And that is called gluconeogenesis. The liver cells or the hepatocytes and certain cells in the kidneys can convert these molecules through transamination processes or through beta oxidation into glucose molecules. So we can get glycerol from triglyceride catabolism. We can get pyruvate and lactate from glycolysis, and compounds from the citric acid cycle that can undergo gluconeogenesis, and certain amino acids can be glucogenic as well. Some figures are missing, so I'm going to skip those parts. So now for lipids. So the process of forming lipids is called lipogenesis. And depending on what type of lipids you're forming is what substrates do you use. Like we have an enzyme that's called fatty acid synthase that can bring fatty acids together, and then it will be located, actually, this enzyme in the cytosol, and it can start forming 2 carbon units first, and then start assembling them little by little into triglycerides. In triglyceride, you have 2 fatty acids, and then you have a glycerol molecule. Now, these triglycerides are assembled in the cell in the endoplasmic reticulum. So it's a process that it takes a little bit more steps. And these triglycerides, once they are formed, they will be stored in areas where we have adipose tissue in our body, like in the subcutaneous tissue, and around the kidneys, around the heart, behind our eyes. But the major storage of adipose tissue will be in the subcutaneous tissue underneath our skin. Now, this lipogenesis starts when you have glycogen storage full. Like when your liver has a lot of glycogen, and then your muscle cells are full of glycogen, what is the next step? To form triglycerides through fatty acids and glycerol, and then you put it in the adipose tissue. So then we will have some molecules that enters into this process, but some of them, like acetyl-CoA, will be utilized by other metabolic pathways, except in the citric acid cycle, so that you can have conversion of this acetyl-CoA into glycerol, which is the other part that will be added into these fatty acids. And then some excess of amino acids also can be converted into triglycerides. Now, sometimes we have deposit of fatty acids or adipose tissue into the liver, and this is called fatty liver disease or steatohepatitis. This is accumulation of triglycerides and other fats in the hepatocytes, and it can result because you saturate these other enzymes that are used to transaminate these proteins. You saturate them and you damage them with alcohol molecules. So one of the common causes of fatty liver will be alcohol abuse, also obesity, diabetes, and many drugs and toxins that can damage the enzymes that can convert these nutrients into molecules that can be utilized by other tissues. Now, another thing that it can happen is that you can have reduced beta oxidation of the lipids or poor delivery of these lipids out of the liver, or excess of delivery of triglyceride into the liver. If this continues, it can damage severely the liver, creating hepatic failure, but before cirrhosis if it wasn't treated. So some treatments include modifying the intake of lipids and other nutrients, also having a weight loss program, abstaining from alcohol, drugs, or being exposed to preventing the exposure to certain toxins that can damage the liver. Any questions of anabolism of fats? Okay, now for protein synthesis. Well, protein synthesis is highly necessary in our body because our body is mainly made out of proteins. And we have 20 amino acids, 11 of them are essential. The rest are non-essential. And when it comes to essential amino acids, will be amino acids that are required to be in our diet. Otherwise, our cells won't be able to make them. But for the rest that are non-essential, you can transaminate, you can change R groups, and then you can have a different type of amino acid. Now, amino acids are not stored. So some of them, they can be converted into glucose by gluconeogenesis, or they can be incorporated into glycogen. While some of them, they can be used to form fatty acids and stored as triglycerides or fats. So those were then the parts for anabolism of lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. Do you have any questions? Okay, now for metabolic state. So a metabolic state is defined as the status or the condition of our body. We have two metabolic states, fed or absorptive, and non-fed, that it is post-absorptive. In the absorptive state, which happens around 4 hours after we ingest our meals, during those 4 hours, we'll be absorbing nutrients. In this absorptive state, we have oxidation of the nutrients. So the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins that we ingest, they undergo oxidation, and most of them will be converted into glucose if necessary for providing glucose to the cells in our body that use it the most, like the the brain. And then with these nutrients, including fatty acids and glycerol, then we can have synthesis reactions. Mostly will be synthesized proteins, or to make cells, to make hair, to make nails, to make enzymes, so that our body can function properly. And of course, we have to have balanced diets. Okay, it's not because proteins are very abundant in our body, that means that that's all that we need to eat. And we shouldn't, because they taste really good, we shouldn't eat a lot of sweets as well. Okay, so we have to have balanced diet. And then with all of these nutrients, then the excess, again, will be stored first as glycogen, and then as fatty tissue, and then the rest will be utilized. So in lipogenesis, which happens in the absorptive state, you have a storage of triglycerides in adipocytes and also in the hepatocytes. But again, this deposit of triglycerides in the hepatocytes, it shouldn't be that much, otherwise we will have steatohepatitis, or fatty liver. Now, a hormone that controls this state of lipogenesis is insulin. Insulin stimulates the intake of glucose by the cells, and then the cells make their function with this glucose, but the rest of the excess of the glucose will be converted into glycogen, and excess of that will be converted into triglycerides. Now, the post-absorptive state will be the opposite of the absorptive state. So instead of absorbing nutrients, we will start breaking down the nutrients that we have in our body, and then we will bring these molecules into the circulation. First, we will have to use glucose. So if you have glycogen, you will start breaking down, but if you run out of glycogen, then the second molecule that we will start using will be lipids, and then if lipids are gone, we'll start breaking down proteins. And protein breakdown in muscle cells will release specifically glucogenic amino acids in the blood. That's the first type of amino acids that you will release. And then in post-absorptive state, you also have lipolysis, which is, again, the breaking down of these triglycerides. So part of this metabolism is going to lead to the release of ketone bodies by breaking down all of these molecules. And this process of forming ketone bodies is called ketogenesis. So you convert fatty acids into ketone bodies. And again, remember, ketone bodies can be used by the brain cells as a desperate measure to obtain energy, but it won't be happy. Actually, the person who's in ketogenesis will be a little bit disoriented, because that's not the usual food for the brain. Okay, and now we will have this oxidation of nutrients such as fatty acids that will provide, of course, some nutrients, because you have a lot of bonds there between these, some ATP, because you have a lot of bonds between these carbon molecules. However, again, it's not the perfect use of energy. Now, in the post-absorptive state, one of the hormones that participates is glucagon. Again, why? Because this one is the one that is going to stimulate glycogenolysis so that you can release your storage of glucose. And then you will also release epinephrine, norepinephrine. And in certain cases, especially during stress time, you will release cortisol. Cortisol stimulates gluconeogenesis, and then you will start releasing glucogenic precursors into the blood. So, in our brain, we have the satiety center that stimulates the sensation of fullness. And we have a hormone that it is released by adipose tissue and also by other cells in our body when we are sleeping, that is called leptin. Leptin stimulates the satiety center so that we feel full. So one of the causes of lack of satiety sometimes is not sleeping well. But how are you going to sleep well if you go to the bed in empty stomach? Don't think that because we are sleeping that our metabolism completely shuts down. No, we still have basal rate of metabolism in which our muscle cells are repairing if it's needed, or they're growing. Many tissues are undergoing changes, and we need nutrients. And without those nutrients, instead of being in absorptive state and repairing, we'll be in post-absorptive state, and that will lead to poor sleep. And then that will lead to the lack of leptin. And the next morning, we will be eating, and then we won't be feel satisfied. Now, in hunger, we have stimulated the desire to eat, and we have actually hunger center that is located in the hypothalamus. These also can be damaged by trauma, by strokes, and the person will eat but still feel hungry. So we have this feeding center, and here is the leptin I was talking about, as if he wasn't there. So this then it's important to keep in mind for regulation of feeding. So we have to have input into the satiety center, into the feeding center, and also have some hormones like leptin. Ghrelin, it's another enzyme, and it's a hormone that is released actually by the stomach, that it's leading to hunger. Now, for fasting is a prolonged period during the person do not eat as much or do not eat anything at all. And this, if it's running in the long term, is going to lead to problems. Why? Because, of course, during fasting, we will start using not only the glycogen and the lipids, but we are going to start using our proteins. Many people, when they undergo diets, these crashing diets, they feel so happy because in a very short period of time, they lose weight. But the weight that they're losing, they're also losing it in muscular mass, and that's not good. So that's why any diet that the person has, it has to be limited and balanced, and also it has to, the person still keep doing exercise, because exercise stimulates the growth of tissues, including muscle tissue. So then persons supposed to avoid protein wasting, which in some cases can lead to death. And then here is the hormone. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Ghrelin, that stimulates hunger. And also we have other hormones like neuropeptide Y and orexins that are neurotransmitters that are located in the nervous system that promotes hunger. And then we have this cholecystokinin that you saw in the previous chapter that actually stimulates the vagus nerve so that we can have digestion. And this cholecystokinin is released when you have distension of the stomach and also when you have transfer of chyme from the stomach into the duodenum. Now, we also have regulation of nutrition through short-term signals. So the previous ones that we saw are long-term signals, but we have also short-term signals that can inhibit or stimulate feeding. For instance, we have glucagon-like peptide GLP-1 that promotes uptake of glucose by the cells, which decreases food intake. Have you heard about this before lately?
Isn't that new, really popular drug that's very, very expensive?
Yes. We don't say commercial names here, but it's those shots of that helps to reduce weight. And they're very good, by the way. But again, this is one of the things that has to be prescribed appropriately, because you have to change habits as well. It's not only, I remember a friend that he was diabetic and he knew that he couldn't take a lot of sweets, but he couldn't help it. And one day, he was taking a lot of sweets, said, I'm going to go out and have a shot of insulin. That's not good, right? So same here. These drugs exist and they are very good because sometimes you have lack of response to these GLP or poor levels of GLP in your body, but this is just temporary, okay? And now, sometimes you have to be careful with some of these drugs because they can lead to hypoglycemia if you take more than that. So now for metabolic rate. So metabolic rate, it is the total amount of energy expended by the body to power all its processes. So we have background metabolism. Even when we are not doing anything, we're doing something. Our body is working. And that's the basal metabolic rate. And that basal metabolic rate, it is measured actually in consumption of oxygen per gram of tissue that you have. And we have, of course, this measurement in food that is called calories, which, remember, 1 calorie with capital C letter means 1,000 calories. That can tell you how much nutritional value you have in foods. So we have, let's see, I know that some of you already know this, but these calories are measured per gram of certain nutrients. And if you don't know it, you can find it. Okay, so let's see how many calories we get per gram of certain nutrients. How many calories we get in carbohydrates per gram? 4. Proteins as well. And what about lipids?
Not
Mhm. There is this slide where we're going to see the distribution of my plate, the USDA recommendation for proportion of foods, different types for dietary intake. I don't think that exists anymore. I think we're moving more towards proteins nowadays. I haven't had the time to catch up with all those changes. But in general, the manufacturers of foods, they can provide us with labels that tells us how many grams of certain nutrients you have per serving, and then you have to just take into account how many servings you have in certain containers, and then you can calculate your ingestion of calories based on that. Now remember that 1 calorie is supposed to elevate the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. And that calorie helps us to perform work, because ultimately those nutrients are going to be converted into ATP. So not only the food that we ingest, it is converted into ATP, but also we generate heat as these processes are happening. And that generation of heat, remember, is 60%, but that 60%, it is not lost, because many think, oh, well, I mean, why we use only 30% to generate ATP, and then 60% is lost as heat. Well, remember, heat is what brings molecules together. It's what makes the molecules to vibrate, and then the enzyme and the substrates can get together, and then you perform a metabolism. So it generates heat. That's the thermogenesis effect of food. And then when you measure your calories in your food, this is called calorimetry. And then basal metabolic rate, as I told you before, is the background metabolism that we have. And that varies according to age, gender, physiological state of the person, genetics as well, hormonal state. There are several things that can alter the basal metabolic rate. But a basal metabolic rate basically is the minimum amount of energy that we have to require to sustain life. So, a person is functioning at their basal metabolic rate when they have not eaten in 12 hours and had a restful night's sleep, and is not performing any physical activity and have not performed a strenuous activity for at least 1 hour, plus the person is not under physical and emotional stress, and the temperature is constant, is comfortable. That is something that I wanted to also to bring into mind. So the person has to be calm. So when we are under stress, we release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Even if we are sitting, we're releasing these hormones, and we're releasing cortisol. They have effect in our metabolism. And as well, we have the presence of several hormones like thyroid hormone, growth hormone, estrogen, testosterone that affects our metabolism. But these are the conditions in which basal metabolic rate is measured, and that includes having the right temperature. So, it is well known that in workplaces, they have offices, they have the temperature set during summertime or warm weather that it is comfortable for males, but not for females. And then females, when they are in cold temperature, they're shivering, and then they are stressing, so they feel much hungry than men because they are out of the comfort zone for the temperature. But if it would be the ideal temperature plus all these other factors that when you measure the basal metabolic rate, and then again, you put the person in a chamber, and then the person is breathing, and then you see how much consumption of oxygen the body has of that person, and that's how you measure the metabolic rate. Now, it is possible to rev up your metabolism or increase your basal metabolic rate, of course, if you increase your body mass in muscle. One of the reasons why males consume more calories per gram of tissue is because they have greater density in their muscles than females. And of course, there are drugs that can accelerate the metabolism itself, or certain things like caffeine, green, capsaicin. But again, those are something that if you drink so much caffeine or eat a lot of spicy foods or green tea, that is going to upset your stomach. And then for exchange of heat and the environment, well, that is part of metabolism too, because of course, when we are surrounded by the environment, the environmental temperature affects our metabolism. When you have high temperature in the environment, of course your metabolism accelerates, and vice versa. Now, heat, remember, moves from an area of high temperature to low temperature. And heat can be transferred from one object to another through electromagnetic waves, through radiation. And our body radiates 50% of the body heat's radiation. Radiates, actually radiation, that was redundant. And we also have conduction, in which actually you have physical contact between two objects. So conduction, it can be also a way to lose heat, and can be used as well in certain medical conditions, like if someone has inflammation, part of the cardinal signs will be high temperature. So what do? You put an ice pack, and then you can transmit heat from your body into there. Now, in convection, you have heat transferred through liquid or gaseous medium. So basically, it's like dissipating the heat to the air. And our body transfers between 15 to 20% of the heat through method of convection. Another way of losing heat is through evaporation, and that will be when water changes from a state of liquid to a gas. And that can occur in our skin, in our lungs. Remember what I told you in the respiratory system chapter. We not only exhale CO2, but also we exhale water. Blow air through your mouth, in your palm, you feel the moisture. So we also evaporate water, and we lose heat. So that's part of what we call insensible heat loss. But we also sweat, and that makes 20 to 25% of heat loss. So perspiration, for instance. Another missing. I'm pretty sure that those images are showing in campus, guys. Now, our body temperature ranges between 35.8 to 38.2 degrees Celsius with a median of 37 degrees Celsius. And it will be between 96 to 101 Fahrenheit. Well, not that much. So in Fahrenheit, it's like 96.3 or so. And it is important to measure the body temperature because that will tell you what is the metabolic state in some cases. And of course, we know that this can be also used as birth control when we know that females had a degree Celsius of body temperature increase during ovulation. It is not very exact. It is not highly recommended, but it is something that to keep in mind, a fluctuation of body temperature. Now, how do we regulate this body temperature? Well, we have thermoreceptors in areas of the body like the skin, and these thermoreceptors detect the environmental temperature, and they are connected to nerves that brings this information to the thermoregulatory center that we have in the hypothalamus. And in the hypothalamus, we have this heat loss center that can be activated when we are in a body temperature, in an environmental temperature that is higher than our body temperature. That can lead to increased rate of respiration, increased production of sweat, also vasodilation so that we can dissipate the heat, and behavioral changes like removing excess of clothing, also fanning with an object, turning on the AC, drinking water, etc. And that will be until we have the normal body temperature. Now, what will be the opposite when we have a low body temperature? Well, in this case, we will have also same thermoreceptor sending the signal, afferent signal, into the hypothalamus through these nerves that are located in the spinal cord, and then that reaches into the hypothalamus. So then you will have an efferent signal from this control center into the blood vessels in our skin so that we can have vasoconstriction, and then we shift the blood from the skin into the deeper portions of our body so that we can maintain body core temperature, and then behavioral changes occurs like grabbing clothing to protect ourselves, and as well you will have contraction of your muscles. So you will start shivering in order to generate heat by this contraction of the muscles. So, decreased body temperature is known as hypothermia. It is when the body temperature drops below 32 degrees Celsius or 89.6 Fahrenheit. If it happens in distal areas of the body like the toes or the fingers, that can lead to frostbite. So that leads to severe vasoconstriction of the blood vessels, and that can lead to necrosis. People have lost toes and fingers due to frostbite. Hyperthermia will be elevated temperature above 101 degrees Celsius or 38.3, and it can happen due to overly exposure to the sun, or maybe because someone has damage of this thermoregulatory center, and as well the person may have an infection, and anything of that can lead to heat stroke. Heat stroke is characterized by hot, dry skin, rapid breathing, And the pulse rate is higher, also the heart rate, of course, because it's related to the pulse, and also can lead to unconsciousness. So it can be fatal if it's not treated properly. Fever is due to an increased set in the temperature center in our hypothalamus, and this can result from the release of pyrogens, which can be of different kinds, like prostaglandins. It can be arachidonic acid. It can be tumor necrosis factor, especially if the person has an infection. So that sets the body temperature higher point. So that's thermoregulation. Do you have any questions? Okay, now for nutrients. So we're going to talk about different types of nutrients. So nutrient is a substance that is required by our body to perform metabolic processes. So the daily amount of nutrients that is recommended, it is given by the USDA, and it depends on age and gender, and they subdivide the nutrients into macronutrients, those ones that are requiring huge amounts, and micronutrients, those ones that are requiring small amounts. That includes vitamins and minerals. Now, essential nutrients will be as many as 50 nutrient types that are not produced by our body, and that includes many vitamins, minerals. So we're going to talk about this quickly. I'm not going to spend so much time, but two adults, carbohydrates have to make between 45 to 65% of the total caloric intake, while lipids less than 30%, and proteins 10 to 35%. These are previous recommendations. Again, these might have changed, and I'm sure that they have changed, at least for the proteins, into a higher percentage. But in order to be more updated to this, you can visit the USDA webpage. Now, carbohydrates, we have not only, of course, carbohydrates that are used by our body. We have some other ones that are not used by our body, like fibers. Fibers comes usually in plants, and they can be insoluble, like the ones that are not digestible at all, or they can be partially digestible by bacteria in the colon, and these are called soluble fibers. These soluble fibers help to lower cholesterol. So it is important then, as part of our diet, to ingest plants because they provide us with fiber, which has these good properties. Now, then when it comes to these carbohydrates, we have different types, like glucose that can be obtained in the sucrose, which is the sugar that we usually ingest, but also we have fructose that comes in fruits, and glucose also can be found in milk together with galactose, which is part of these monomers of glucose. And then we have, carbohydrates. We have lipids that can be subdivided into saturated and unsaturated. Saturated will be when they don't have double covalent bonds and they are very rigid. These ones will be the ones that can occlude our arteries. And then we have unsaturated that can be monounsaturated if it only has a single covalent bond between the carbon molecules, or polyunsaturated when they have more than one double covalent bond. And in that case, they are flexible in their chemical structure and they don't occlude the arteries. So now we have certain unsaturated fatty acids like omega-3 that are essential. And we, as a general rule, with few exceptions, know that saturated fats are solid in room temperature, while unsaturated fat are liquid. We have other essential fatty acids like linoleic acid and linoleic acid that are required to have a healthy metabolism. And then just as for the macronutrients, the USDA gives some recommendations for the micronutrients and also for the lipids that, of course, we know that they're supposed to be less than 10% of the total caloric intake, especially to prevent CAD or coronary artery disease and certain cancers. Now, for proteins, the recommendation between 10 to 35% of our diet, typically when it comes to grams per pound, is typically 1 gram per pound of our body weight that we have. And then the proteins give us amino acids. So we have non-essential amino acids and essential amino acids. Essential, again, whether they are amino acids or lipids, they have to be ingested. And then here are the division between the non-essential and the essential. So the essential are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. So the rest, the non-essential, they don't require to be ingested in our body because there are versions that can be created among them by transaminating groups. And then we can subdivide the proteins into complete and incomplete. Complete will be the ones that give you the 20 amino acids. Incomplete, the ones that lack certain amino acids. And in our diet, if we combine some incomplete proteins, it can make up for a complete protein. Or nutrients that have incomplete proteins, if you ingest them, can make for complete proteins. Meat, red meat, is a complete protein. But you can ingest rice and beans, and that makes a complete protein because you can combine these essential and non-essential amino acids. Now, gluten is a combination of 2 proteins that occur in wheat and other grass-based grains, and about 4 to 7% of people in the world is sensitive to gluten, and their intestinal cells basically shorten when they ingest this gluten, and then they don't absorb well their nutrients. And this disease is known as celiac disease. And it's an attack to these cells in the large intestine. Now, vitamins. We have 13 known vitamins. We have a major group, fat-soluble and water-soluble. The water-soluble are the group B, and the lipid-soluble will be ADEK, A, D, E, and K. So, lipid-soluble. Now, these lipid-soluble vitamins can cause toxicity because they can be accumulated in adipose tissue. Now, water-soluble, although they are not accumulated, with the exception of vitamin B12 that is stored temporarily in the liver for up to 3 months, these ones, they're not accumulated, but they can have certain toxicities. Like, for instance, if you over-ingest vitamin C, that can irritate your stomach because it's an acid, it's ascorbic acid. So vitamin B group and vitamin C. All of them are necessary and they have different functions. Like vitamin C, for instance, is good to make strong collagen fibers. Without it, the person will have a lot of bleeding and desquamation of their skin. Others, like vitamin B12, help to mature the red blood cells. Other than that, you will have megaloblastic anemia. And these ones are absorbed via micelles in the small intestine. And you need to have bile to emulsify these vitamins first, and then you can absorb them. And we saw this before, like vitamin B12 can be destroyed by the acid in the stomach, and then you have to give this intrinsic factor by the parietal cells so that you can coat it and then can go into the ileum and be absorbed. And then excess of the water-soluble vitamins will be excreted by the kidneys. And here are the daily recommendations. And what are their names, their function. Avitaminosis will be the lack of a vitamin. It leads to certain consequences. Like for instance, if someone doesn't ingest enough vitamin A, the person will have night blindness because this one is necessary to produce rhodopsin, a protein that it helps us to see during nighttime. Folic acid in females in reproductive stage is very important. If they become pregnant and they don't have enough folic acid, the baby's spinal cord, the spinal tube is not going to close. So they will have spina bifida. Since they discovered that, folic acid is found in all cereals and many breads, so that the female don't have avitaminosis of folic acid. So some of them are needed for the baby. One of the micronutrients that we need is iodine to form thyroid hormone, and also for the baby, because the baby will develop enough levels of thyroid hormone, which is necessary for good development of the brain. Okay. So several of them, although they might have very low RDA, or daily dose recommended, they are necessary. So some are found naturally, of course, like vitamin C are found in citrus fruits, red and green peppers. And then look, when you have an excess, it irritates your stomach. You have nausea, vomiting, kidney stones with vitamin C. The lack of vitamin C leads to scurvy. Calcium. Calcium is a mineral. It's a macromineral. It is required in amounts of 1.2 grams or 1,200 milligrams and above in adults. Okay, and then we have, well, that's a major mineral. And then we have other minerals that are not required in large amounts. And zinc is one of them. Iron, we don't need it in great amounts because huge amounts of iron can damage our liver. So those are trace elements. And here is where they are found, like chloride. It is found in table salt. Lack of chloride leads to muscle cramps, just like as magnesium, also potassium leads to muscle cramps, and excess leads to fluid retention. Now, potassium not only leads to muscle cramps with deficiency, but also problems with heart rhythm, heart failure, muscle weakness, and excess can lead to death. Calcium chloride, for instance. So here we have some trace elements examples. Copper, for instance, is a coenzyme of the electron transport chain. So if someone doesn't have enough copper, the person will have anemia, and excess will lead to liver failure and dysfunction of the CNS. Iron deficiency anemia, when you don't have enough iron. Excess will lead to hemochromatosis, which leads to nausea, vomiting, and damage in the liver. Others like zinc, manganese, magnesium serve as coenzymes as well, so that leads to low metabolism. And again, the USDA provides us with daily recommendations for these. Lastly, for cholesterol. So cholesterol, it's a lipid that has a complex structure. It's four rings, and it's very important because it is forming part of the plasma membrane in our cells, and also help us to produce hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Cholesterol, it can be acquired in our diet, but also is produced naturally in our body. So cholesterol, it is processed by the liver, and it's supposed to be only 15% of our diet from the lipids that we ingest. And this cholesterol is packed into molecules. So these molecules are called micelles. And then from there, they can be distributed throughout the body. So cholesterol will be carried through lipoproteins. And we have different lipoproteins. We have very low density lipoproteins that has high percentage of lipids than proteins. And these ones tend to, together with the LDL, tend to clog up our arteries. So LDL is not good. And we have an enzyme that is called lipoprotein lipase that can convert these VLDLs into LDLs, and is necessary to recycle these micelles. Now, we have a good type of cholesterol that is called high-density lipoprotein. And we have a portion for LDL and HDL. So total cholesterol in our blood is supposed to be less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. And when we have LDL, we're supposed to be less than 121 milligrams per deciliter, but less than 70 milligrams per deciliter in those who have risk of having cardiovascular disease. And HDL should be at least 50 milligrams per deciliter. So ideally it will be over 60, but the minimum is supposed to be 50. So we have to have specific percentages. Now, here is the processing of these molecules. So we have this cholesterol that it is found in bile ducts. From there it goes into these hepatocytes, and the hepatocytes will have a cycle. So it will pack these cholesterol molecules with proteins into HDLs, and then these will be the good cholesterol molecules because they have 20% cholesterol, 30% phospholipids, 5% triglycerides, and 45 to 60% proteins. So when you have high levels of HDL, this is the good cholesterol. Now, the LDLs come from the recycling of the very low density lipoproteins, or VLDL. The VLDL is produced here in this packing in the hepatocyte by combining triglycerides with these cholesterol molecules. So you have like around 6% of triglycerides and then you have 10 to 15% of cholesterol, and very low proteins, between 5 to 10%. So that's why they are VLDL. Now, when they go into the cells, like adipose tissue removes these triglycerides, and then you have LDLs. Now, the LDLs goes into our cells, and then they can be absorbed when they bind to these receptors. Sometimes they are not absorbed because these receptors can be mutated in certain populations, and then you have high levels of LDLs, which have 45% cholesterol, is very high percentage. And then you have around 25% proteins and 25% phospholipids. Now, these LDLs, when they bring cholesterol to the cells, this cholesterol can be packed into these HDLs, but sometimes it is not packed, and then can be used to perform metabolic functions to make estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Unfortunately, sometimes when it is not utilized, it will remain in the bloodstream, and then it will form plaques, and then the person will have coronary artery disease. So that it is called cholesterolemia. There are families that have mutated receptors, and this is called familial hypercholesterolemia. So this is all for this